Today, we are honored and very pleased to welcome to Jazz Zone Together one of our nation's leading music educators, Ron McCurdy. Ron currently serves as Assistant Dean of the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee at the Thornton School of Music at the University of Southern California, USC. He previously served as chair of the Jazz Studies Department. He's a highly in-demand performer, clinician, and conductor at events throughout the country. Now it's my pleasure to turn the mic over to Dick Dunscombe to conduct the interview with Ron. Dick. All right. Take it away.
Thank you, Bob. Man, this is going to be some fun. Ron McCurdy, it's so pleased and happy. I'm just joyous to see your face.
Likewise, Dick. It's been a while. It's been a minute since we've seen each other in person.
They go by pretty quick, don't they?
And thank you, Bob, for that wonderful introduction as well. So yes, it's been this pandemic has kept us apart. I haven't been to the gym conference in a few years, and just I've been home creating, practicing.
Well, I'm sure that that's going to be very interesting during the discussion this morning, to find out what you're into. Now, Ron, we'd like to open the interviews by having you share how you came to study music and what led you to pursue music as your vocation.
That's a great question. I grew up in a small town called Belgrade, Florida. My father was a high school principal, and my mother taught third grade. And my father was kind of an amateur trumpet player. Wasn't very good. He didn't practice. He would play twice a year at Christmas and Easter. So as a trumpet player, trumpet you got to spend a little more time with the instrument than twice a year. But he played well enough to inspire me. But more importantly, he had a very eclectic record collection. And his routine every morning before going to work, he would get up at 5 o'clock, read 2 newspapers, and put on records. So from day one of my life, I grew up hearing everything from the Mormon Tabernacle Choir to Bach's B minor Mass to Ella Fitzgerald to Louis Armstrong to you name it, I heard it. So it was all on my hard drive. And I'm about to date myself. When I was in school, there were no jazz studies programs in high school. Or even in college at Florida A&M, we didn't have much of a jazz program. But I had heard the music enough. And I remember, by the time I was 6 years old, I could sing Ella Fitzgerald solo. I heard it, every day. So I'll often tell students' parents, or in fact my students here at USC, that you don't choose art chooses you. And I knew very early on in my life that I was going to be in music. My mother used to have her little women's club meetings on Sundays, the first Sunday of every month. And she would always have me come in and play my harmonica. That was my first instrument. Play my harmonica and sing for her women's club. And so I just knew that I was going to be, involved in music. The education part probably came from my parents and the need to teach. Like I said, my father was a high school principal, and I saw how rewarding experience it was for him, and how much he enjoyed teaching and sharing and helping other people. And my father would always say, "Son, make yourself useful. Make yourself useful. Find a way to help other people." So I've had the best of both worlds. I've been able to share my talents with other people. Been able to help students just like you, Dick. You've had thousands of students who've gone on to do great things. Not necessarily be musicians, but be great human beings. And for me, that's a lot more important than whether or not you win a Grammy or not. If you win a Grammy, that's icing on the cake. But if you are a great human being, and you can use what you have learned through preparing and being a part of a musical organization, then that to me allows me to realize that I've done a pretty good job of helping people realize their dreams and goals.
Well, for those of you listening, you just got a beautiful sermon on pathway to success and happiness and joy. And boy, this is the guy that brings them all to the table. Now, let's go one step at a time. One of your early steps was at your alma mater, the University of Kansas, where you served as director of jazz studies. I think that's when we met, maybe.
That's right.
Tell us about your years there and how you built a highly recognized collegiate jazz program.
When I came to Kansas, like many other universities, jazz was a four-letter word. And in fact, just before I arrived, I had heard rumors that the former dean would walk on the fourth floor where the practice rooms. Third, you'd be asked to leave the practice rooms.
Mm.
If you talk to Gary Foster, who was a student at Kansas, he was there during those periods of time. And when I got there, things had gotten a little better. Bob Foster, who was director of bands, started what was kind of a jazz program. It was a jazz band that also functioned as the basketball band. There was no curriculum. There was no improv classes or vocal jazz ensemble, anything like that. So when I came as a graduate student in 1976, again, I heard my father's voice, Ron, make yourself useful. So I looked at the school and I thought, well, okay, what are they lacking here? How can I be of service? What can I do to improve the overall quality of the school? And so for me, it was, like I said, I had never had any real jazz training at all. In fact, I remember when my first year at Kansas, Jamie Abersol came as a guest clinician. And I was playing in the band, top band, and I played a solo. And when we finished the concert, I went up to Jamie and said, "How did I sound?" Which was a terrible question to ask. And Jamie said, "Well, you need to come to my jazz camp and learn how to play." And I did. And that's where I met David Baker, Rufus Reed, Adam Nussbaum, Tom Harrell. The list goes on and on. And that was a similar moment in my life because for the first time, I was around great players. And what I did, I went to every master class. I learned how to, with drums, I learned, Ed Thigpen was there, I learned about drums, how to play drums. I was hanging out with Rufus, I learned about the function of the bass. With keyboard, with Hal Galper, I learned voicings and how to comp. So I just immersed myself, and I went to the camp for the next 10 years. Every summer I would go to the Abersol camps. And I brought that knowledge back to Kansas. And before you knew it, we had 3 or 4 jazz bands. We had combos. We had a vocal jazz ensemble. I remember going to Gene Akins' jazz camp. And I will also tell you that IAJE at the time, in fact, it was NAJ when I first started going. I remember my first conference was in Daytona, I think in 1977 or 78, somewhere around there. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. And I would get up, be at all the master classes, clinics at the NAJE conference. And so I would bring that information back to Kansas, and I was a one-man show. I was a grad student, but I was teaching all the classes, running the top band, and the second band, I was doing combos. I would get to school at 8 o'clock in the morning and get home at 10 o'clock at night, 5 days a week. Plus, I was assistant with the marching band, which is how I got to Kansas. And in fact, I'm happy to tell you right now, next month, I'm going to Kansas. They're going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Jazz Studies program. Dan Gailey, who succeeded me, is doing a fantastic job. And he's bringing me back as a guest soloist. I'm going to play with the band. I'm going to see a bunch of my former students. And it's going to be a great time. So that was my first experience as an educator. And in fact, I learned how to teach and play while I was at Kansas. So I'm always grateful to those who welcomed me at Kansas, because that's where I grew up, basically, as a musician.
Yeah, you made a big hit there. And I'm telling you, lots of people to this day know about that Kansas program, which came out of, as you said, came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you arrived in California, you served as a time as director of the Thelonious Monk Institute.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us some stories about that organization and how it serves the jazz world today.
Well, we know Thelonious Monk was one of our great icons and great innovators of this music. So the program was named after Thelonious Monk. Tom Carter was the executive CEO of that organization. At the time, T.S. Monk was still involved. It's now called the Herbie Hancock Institute of Jazz now. That program was amazing in that it was at NEC, and then it moved from NEC to USC in Los Angeles. At that time, I was professor at the University of Minnesota. I left Kansas, and I joined the faculty at the University of Minnesota. And I enjoyed being in Minneapolis because at the time there, Bobby McFerrin was the artistic director for the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. Prince I used to go to Paisley Park and record at Prince's studio. Terry Lewis and Jimmy Jam were very active in Minneapolis. Philip Brunel, who was a wonderful composer, conductor, ran a great program there. So Minneapolis was a great arts city. So I was not looking to leave at all. But our mutual friend, Willie Hill, was involved with the Monk Institute, and he gave my name to Tom Carter as someone who could serve as the director of the Thelonious Monk Institute. So I uprooted myself. I took a leave of absence from Minnesota and spent 2 years here in Los Angeles to work with the Monk Institute. I had a chance to be around many great jazz masters, including Barry Harris, who else? Clark Terry. I mean, it was just, all of our heroes were part of the Monk Institute, and my job was more administrative. Now, as much as I loved that position, I did not enjoy not having a chance to teach anymore, because my job was curriculum design, planning international tours. It was all administrative. So I only did it for 2 years, and I was planning on going back to Minnesota. And this is when Larry Livingston, who was the dean at the time at USC, said, "Ron, we'd like for you to stay. I mean, I know you're going to be leaving the Monk Institute, but will you join our faculty?" So I became the first African American to receive a tenured full professorship at the University of Southern California. So, and I've been here now for this is my 21st year being on the faculty at USC. But I thoroughly enjoyed the Monk Institute. We had, that first year we had Avishai Cohen, the great trumpet player from Israel, was in the program. It was just a great group of musicians that I had a chance to work with. Patrice Rushen was the artistic director, and she was phenomenal to work with. In fact, she's now a colleague of mine as well. She's chair of the pop program here at USC. But it was a great time. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. And but like I said, for me, I missed the teaching. I missed really being in the trenches of having classes. And I mean, it was a 9 to 5 kind of a job, and 2 weeks off for summer vacation. I wasn't used to that. I was used to I was used to having my entire summers off. I was used to having spring break. There was no more spring break. It was like having a real job, Dick, and I wasn't used to having a real job. I said, I'm missing academia. I need to get back in the classroom. I need to have my spring breaks and my summers again so I can do my own things at times. So I was only there for 2 years, but I thoroughly enjoyed that time there.
Amen. Now, you served as president of IAJE. We both did. And it was during a time when it was in transition. Give us your view of how important that was and the importance today of its successive organization, GEN.
Yes. Well, I look at GEN as sort of a first cousin of IAJE because, as you know, many of the folks who are now running GEN were all members of IAJE. Mary Jo Papich is one of our dear, loving friends, and Dr. Lou Fisher. They're all very much involved in GEN. But like I said, for me, and I think for younger generations and for young educators and students, having an opportunity to be able to come to a central location where educators and young students, jazz enthusiasts, professionals can all come together for a 3 or 4 day conference where we're all immersed in the music and the business and the educational part of jazz and the research and the writers and those producers and the composers can all come together to really celebrate this music is a very powerful thing. Like I said, when I was a young pup at Kansas just trying to figure things out, I had 2 shots in the arm during those years. One was in the summertime at the Abersol camps, and the second one was at the IAJE conferences. I was very instrumental in starting our chapter in Kansas. Back in those days, we had state chapters, and I just kind of rose through the ranks. I had ideas that I would put forth, and before you know it, I was serving on committees, and then before you know it, I was asked to be, I think, vice president for a while. Then I became president-elect. In fact, I followed Willie Hill. I think Willie was president, and then I followed him. And then David Baker followed me. David Caffey followed David Baker, and I think Chuck Owens followed Brother Caffey. So my years were about maybe 6 years before IAJE kind of went belly up. I will say, in hindsight, as we look at that organization, we had gotten almost too big, and we had kind of strayed away from the E of the IAJE, in my opinion. We had stopped focusing as much on education and more of the business and industry parts of, like, if you recall, Jake, we used to have nights where there would be student groups would play on the evening concerts. But we kind of got away from that, and it became all of record labels would have their artists perform, which was always great, but we kind of took our eye off the ball, in my opinion. From a fiscal standpoint, we weren't as careful as we should have been. I remember talking to by this time, I was still president. I would say, we're kind of giving the conference away. If we only have one event that we use as our fundraiser, we can't credential everybody. Most of us who are in education, our schools pay for us to be there. So why not, even if we can't, if you're doing like a 50-minute panel discussion, we can't credential you for the entire 4 days. You need to pay something. This is how we were able to, remain financially solvent by by people paying the registration fees and the hotel fees. And I remember it was a challenging time, because I think my year was 9/11, 2000, 2001. And remember, people were afraid to fly. And we had the conference one year in New York, and the second year was in Long Beach. And at that time, Long Beach is a beautiful area, but you had to get on an airplane if you live in the Midwest or at that time, if you remember, to come to Long Beach. So our attendance dropped exponentially, and we lost our church. And then we had the idea of we were already international, but I remember Brent from Canada was saying, we need to have the conference in Canada. And I recall many of our colleagues were geographically challenged. They didn't know where Toronto was. So the whole idea of going to Toronto was like going to the moon for some people. So again, our numbers were low, and it just became almost impossible to maintain financially. And it broke my heart, because it felt like I had a relative pass away when IAJE died. But I was so grateful that Mary Jo and others took up the mantle and kind of came back small with Jen. And I think Jen right now, I think they have the right idea, because everybody pays now. When you come to the conference, whether you're presenting or not, you don't get credentialed for the whole conference. You pay. And this is how they've been able, I think, to remain financially solvent. But the whole event itself is so powerful. In fact, I'm going to be presenting myself this year. I'm doing a presentation on I teach a course here at USC on artist entrepreneurship, and we talk about how do you parlay what you love to do as an artist into commerce. How do you make a living as an artist, as we know, and it can be challenging. So I'm doing a session called "The Baby is Gonna Need Shoes." How do you survive in this post-pandemic era as an artist? So, in fact, this will be coming from my latest book that I just wrote during the pandemic, called "The Artist Entrepreneur: Finding Success in a New Arts Economy." So, like I said, this was one way that I found a way to keep myself from going insane during the pandemic, because I wasn't playing anymore. I wasn't performing, I should say. Practiced a lot, but I wasn't playing. And so, to answer your question, I think IAJE and now Jen.
Ron, as a trumpet performer, you've had an extensive performing career. Let's talk a little bit about some of the highlights of those aspects during that period of time and today, and some background on the Ron McCurdy Collective. What are you currently up to, man?
Well, like I said, I've been blessed to have the best of both worlds. I get to teach at a university, and I always try to keep my chops up. I practice every day. Before we came on, I got up at 6:30, which I always do, and do my long tones, my Schlossberg exercises, lip slurs, and try to keep everything working here. Because what I found, the older you get, the more it takes you to kind of keep things working. I have always kept groups that I have outside the university. And my Ron McCurdy Collective, this was a group of myself on trumpet, a rhythm section, and 4 vocalists. And I began to write for this group, and it was kind of a funk, straight ahead jazz group of musicians, and we just did tunes. I mean, we did concerts, we did jazz festivals, we were quite active here in Los Angeles, and it was a very expensive group to keep together because it was a lot of us. It was like 9 people in the group. We were as big as Earth, Wind, and Fire in terms of numbers in the group. And when you travel, it makes it almost cost prohibitive to keep those kind of groups alive, particularly if you got to get 5 airplane tickets and 9 airplane tickets, 9 hotel rooms. So we kind of kept ourselves somewhat regional. We would travel, by car, rather than having to fly anywhere, unless we had gotten the big calls for the major jazz festivals. But my biggest project has been my Langston Hughes project. That's the one where I have spent the most time, and I've been doing that now for about 15 years, and it ties into my diversity, equity, and inclusion work. As you know, Langston Hughes was one of the progenitors of the Harlem Renaissance, prolific writer. And the work that I do it's from a poem he wrote called Ask Your Mama, 12 Moons for Jazz. And what I did when I was at Minnesota, I wrote the music for this. In fact, Hughes had planned to work with Randy Weston and also Charles Mingus, but he passed away in 1967 and didn't have a chance to do that. So my group was the first to actually realize this work as Langston Hughes had intended. So we probably, pre-pandemic, we were doing maybe 50 or 60 concerts a year. We have an orchestral version of this work that we just did with the Pacific Orchestra. We've worked with the Indianapolis Orchestra, lots of university orchestras. And so we've been quite busy with this work. And we get a chance to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion based on this particular poem. And tied to that, when I go to a school, I will usually do a lecture that I call Disrupting Racism Through the Lens of the Arts, where I talk about protest music, for example. I'll start with the Negro spiritual as being the first form of protest music. I talk about the whole idea of how spirituals really represent what jazz became, in the sense that we have improvisation, meaning about the individuality of the music, what you can do as an artist. Then you have, of course, swing, which is the whole the corporation and the we of how we all work together as musicians and people and artists. And then we have the blues, and the blues is, as Wynton Marsalis says, is how you approach life. The challenges of life with a sense of optimism. You know that life is going to be difficult, and I use the example of sometimes I feel like a motherless child as a place to start, because the word goes sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes I feel like a motherless child, which infers that all the other times I'm okay. Life is challenging, but I'm going to be okay. So again, I've had a chance to combine my scholarship with my artistry, but the Langston Hughes project, that has been probably the biggest thing that has kept me busy and kept me more active as an artist. I've also, in my entrepreneurship thinking, the Lord has blessed me. I always come up with ideas for projects, and like right now, during the midst of the George Floyd murder and the aftermath of that, most universities, and ours was no exception, we had a host of town hall meetings, and we heard from students, faculty, and staff about from marginalized communities what they were experiencing, and when they shared some of their experiences, I wasn't shocked, but a lot of people were shocked by what they were telling us. And what I did again, I took a project that I call Nobody Knows, Voices Unmuted. And I found like 10 poets who represent those marginalized communities. I had them talk about their challenges. What are some of the things that made life challenging for them? And we I composed an underscore underneath these poems. I worked with our cinema school, come up with images that would correlate with the poems. I went to our Kaufman School of Dance, and we had a couple of dancers we premiered this work at the Grammy Museum last year, and we're going to continue to do it even more so this year. So I try to use my role as assistant dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion to convert that work into art. And again, this gives me a reason to practice because I don't want to sound bad when I go on stage. I've always, like I said, I've always found ways to combine my scholarship and my artistry and telling stories. And now in this new role as assistant dean, there's so much work to be done. You know, I mean, if you look at the news, you can see how divided we are as a country. You can see how January 6th was sort of just give us a sense of how divided we are and how democracy is kind of hanging on by a thread right now. So I try and use my artistry to tell stories to help educate people. I always tell my students, my role here is not to change your mind, but to expand it, to be more tolerant of other people, to be more in a nutshell, that's kind of what I've been doing. And this, I guess I said, this gives me a reason to keep practicing, to keep playing, and to use my artistry, as my father would say, to make myself useful.
Boy, you sure got that right. Nobody does it better. I'm just so thrilled that we've had this opportunity to have this interview with you, because there's so much meat on the bone there that is coming out. And it's, as you say, it's not just the music side, it's your spiritual side and others. Now, you know, a lot of our viewers are jazz educators or people that want to become jazz educators. So I'm going to ask you, what would you tell an aspiring jazz educator? Let's say he has a concert band,
Mm-hmm.
but he doesn't have any experience in jazz. Lay out a roadmap for him.
I would go back to my childhood in terms of the listening part. And Jake, you and I and Bobby, we know that this jazz is a language. And you learn to play, you learn to speak by hearing other people do it. I could go because I heard it every day for 18 years. So I would tell every young jazz educator or someone who's trying to start a program, start your rehearsals by putting on a record and playing, and do what I call critical listening, where you listen and you ask the students, what did you hear? And have the analytical listening, I should say. What did you hear? And have them verbally express what they heard. And then have them begin to, as Clark would say, listen, analyze, and imitate, and then assimilate. But when you listen to the music and you analyze it and you say, well, okay, and it may be as simple as, did the line go up? Did the line go up or down? Was it major? Was it minor? And then and as you progress, then your analyzations can become more sophisticated. Was there a tritone substitution in this chord progression? What was going on musically? When was the modulation? When did the modulation take place? What key is this in? But I think the listening part, the analyzing, and the imitating. I remember Roy Hargrove when he was a high school student down in Dallas at Arts Magnet. And Roy, his band director, gave him records. Give him a record to go home and transcribe this Clifford Brown solo. Now, he didn't tell him that was supposed to be hard. Roy didn't know that was supposed to be hard to go home and transcribe a Clifford Brown solo, but he'd come back the next day having transcribed the whole solo and could play it. Take this Freddie Hubbard solo home and transcribe this, bring it back tomorrow. Roy would go home, transcribe it, bring it back tomorrow, and could play it. So I think the main thing is, don't tell the students how hard it is, for one thing. Don't say, oh, this key of B is 5 sharps. No, that's impossible. No, go learn these all 12 keys. Come back tomorrow and play it. Because what I've discovered, there's something magical that happens with students between the ages of about 12 and 16. They make like a seismic shift in their abilities. They go from sounding terrible to sounding really good if they're dedicated to their art. So the main thing as an artist is to be positive, to be encouraging, to treat everybody the same, to be giving of yourself. When you do those kinds of things, you're going to see tremendous growth in your students. Because another thing I've also discovered, and I learned this from Kansas, and this was a very important thing for me. I had a student named Tom Lipscomb, who was a great alto saxophone player in my program at Kansas. Now, Tom, straight A student, he got his undergrad and master's degree in saxophone performance at Kansas. And he was one of my prize students. I had great hopes for him. I wanted him to be the next you fill in the blank for great saxophone players. And he came to me after he graduated and said, Dr. McCurdy, I don't think I'm going to pursue music. I think I have an uncle who's in the Northwest insurance business, and he's going to set me up with a job. I want to have a life. I want to get married. I want to have a family. I want to have a nice, decent income. But I've seen how musicians struggle. And I don't want to be one of those people. I like playing, but I want to go in a different direction. Now, John Ron McCurdy, I took it personal. I go, how dare you? I've invested all this time in you, and you're going to go in the insurance business? Long story short, I didn't know how much I hurt Tom by saying this to him. But maybe 15 years later, he told me, he said, Ron, that really hurt me. It cut me deep when you said that. Now, Tom is now one of the top executives for Northwestern Insurance. He's a multimillionaire. In fact, he dedicated the rehearsal space at Kansas. It's called the Ron McCurdy Rehearsal Building. And Tom put the money up to make that happen. I learned from that as a young educator that it's not about you. And your role as an educator extends far beyond teaching a student how to navigate the John Coltrane matrix or play giant steps. That's important. But as Herbie says, music is what you do. It's not who you are. It took me a long time to figure that out. And that lesson with Tom taught me that. And Tom told me also, he said, Ron, to become one of the top executives at Northwestern, I took the same skills you instilled in me as a student, and I applied that same work ethic to my business. Attention to detail, being vigilant in how you approach your work. That's what I did for my business. Tom has a basketball court in his house. Tom's house is about 15,000 square feet, has an Olympic-sized swimming pool. I mean, he has a property in Aspen. Tom is living a good life. And he still plays his saxophone in church every Sunday.
Mhm.
To me, that's success as an educator. And now when I have students, I say, I say in the music business, we have a supply and demand issue. We have more supplies than there is demand. I mean, if you think about all the universities and conservatories that are producing music majors every year, there are probably more people at this point in the world who are doing music now than ever before. The question becomes, where are they going to work? And how do you distinguish what you have to offer from the milieu of the millions of other people who are vying for that same gig at the Montreux Jazz Festival, Dick? How do you get your act on that particular festival? And what I've discovered, it's more important to create and help nurture great human beings than it is to nurture and create the next John Coltrane. Because if the next John Coltrane, if they're there, they're going to happen whether you are there or not. They're going to happen with or without you. But creating a great human being, that takes a village. That takes a kind of dedication and commitment that goes far beyond blowing into a horn. So that would be my advice. I mean, work on, as a teacher, our role goes far beyond just the music. It's about developing the whole human being, the whole person.
Wow. That's a very impactful approach and one that fits nicely into this interview, which has been one of our incredible interviews. The only thing that I can think of now to make it even better, to ask you, would you play something for us, please?
Man, I would be honored. I got Priscilla right here with me. She's always ready to go. She'll see if I'm ready to go. Let me blow a few. Let's make sure I'm still warmed up. Yeah, man. That's
That's
all I
so,
got this morning.
so beautiful, Ron. My goodness. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Embraceable you. I want to reach out and embrace you. Given us, you've given us such a beautiful interview, man. And I can't tell you how good it is to be back again with you. And thank you. And man, I love you.
Well, Dick, I love you too, man. I remember I was a young pup in 1988, 1987. You took me over to the Montreux Jazz Festival, gave me a little tour, and the next year I brought my band over. You remember that?
I certainly
1988.
do.
We had the great Bill Waters, God rest his soul.
Oh, yes.
And we played on the evening concert with my dear friend from University of Utah. What's the brother's name? Had the program at Utah from Provo. I can't recall his name. I think he just retired a few years ago.
Ray Smith.
Ray Smith, yes. And my students are still talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
And you took a chance on my program, and I'm so grateful for that because it changed my life. In fact, that was my first time going to the Montreux Jazz Festival. And I've been since then many times, and that was because of you. So again, I cannot thank you. Thank you, Bob, for all the great work you did with Warner Brothers all those years. You know, we got our book, you know, the Great Jazz Masters, and the book that we did with Willie on with Approaching the Standards. I mean, so I just appreciate you guys so much, and I'm so grateful for your contributions to music education and jazz education. So thank both of you for having me and for all the work that you've done your entire careers, and you're still doing it. Look at you guys, you're still doing it.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Ron. Great information, and just truly, well, as your entire life and career has been inspiring words here for us today. To our viewers, thanks for joining us for this Jazz Zone Together interview. Please check out the entire library of interviews. We know you'll find them of real value to your program. Watch for updates as we're adding new interviews regularly.